This program might contain strong language. If you think you may be offended, switch off now.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Inside Mojo podcast. We have planned 20 episodes to commemorate WatchMojo's 20-year history on YouTube, and this week is episode 7. We are talking about WatchMojo's decision to go big. I'm your host, Rob, and with me as always is our CEO and co-founder, Ashkan Karbasfrooshan. How's it going, Ash? Where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling in from Orlando, or Kissimmee to be precise. Took the gals down to Disney World, which I'd never been. And I don't know if you know this, but did you know Disney World, ORL, Orlando, Disneyland, LA, Anaheim? I didn't know that. I don't even know that's a coincidence, but given the geniuses of Disney, probably not. And it is inspiring. You know, people are always like, Ash, it's just, you're on vacation. It's just a resort. It's just a theme park. But I'm like, no, there's meaning. And it's true. Seeing Disney, you know, how they've evolved over the decades to kind of stay on top of entertainment and escapism is truly fascinating. And it's been fun, but exhausting.
Yeah, I hear that all the time, that it's extremely exhausting to go there because there's so much to do and you're trying to see as much as you can in a short amount of time. But it's probably worth it. I've never been myself, but one day I will. Love to take the kids there.
Yeah, I've never been. You know, it's like I didn't travel much when I was younger. So then when I was like 20 something, it wasn't something I wanted to do. But some of our friends were like, we should go. And we're like, you know what? Let's do it. By the way, this background is not a fake background.
It looks great.
It looks very fake, but these are spears, actually.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, the theme of today's episode is go big or go home. Do you believe in that type of thinking?
Yes and no. Look, when I started WatchMojo and I would talk to venture capitalists, they would always kind of like dismiss WatchMojo as like, ooh, that's not a venture business. They would say that's a lifestyle business. And I kind of hated that. And even though there's nothing wrong with the lifestyle business, which I call boutique businesses. But here's the thing. If you do not keep growing, if you do not keep innovating, look at Disney. Disney's a great example. You do die. You know what I mean? Like, because not just you in a silo and your business shrinks or becomes, obsolete or irrelevant, but there's competition, you know. And Disney is a good example. They already had a successful franchise during Michael Eisner's run. He greenlit like Aladdin, a lot of other movies that kind of in the 90s, you know, gave a renaissance to the Disney franchise and portfolio of IP. But to their credit, then 10 years later in the late 2000s, you know, they bought Pixar, Marvel, LucasArts, and then that led to probably they overdid it, but, you know, it kind of started a whole new chapter. So I would say if one, like a founder, an operator, a CEO, an entrepreneur, if they have that ambition and drive, then they do need to go big. Now, they can define what big is. You don't want to take risks that kill your business. But I do think if you don't keep growing, however you define growth, you will eventually die. So either through necessity or desire, yeah, I do think net you do have to go big or go home.
We've got a poll that just went up on the WatchMojo YouTube channel. And this ties into the next question that I have for you. Which of these skills do you think is the most important to succeed in media? Is it talent and creativity, management and business skills, or ambition and persistence? To you, Ash, what is the most important thing you need to succeed in the media business?
Well, look, in the media business, let's be fair, you usually have like the creative talent side of, let's keep this up for just 2 seconds. So in media, you do have people that, you could be in the accounting department. Obviously, I'm not talking about those people. This is a YouTube. This is a show really about storytellers and entrepreneurs. I think if you don't have the blue there, the artistic talent, the creativity, whether it's a writer, directing, or in just the world, like you're a singer, dancer, whatever, I don't think you will be seen as authentic and genuine. You know, I've always liked stories. I've liked biographies. You know, I love music more than probably even movies and TV shows. And so if you don't have that passion, or if in my case, I'm a pretty decent writer, I like to think at least. So if you don't have that as a core, then I think the rest is kind of moot unless you find yourself somebody who is good at that, and then you bring the other ones. So I think that is, in my opinion, like probably 50-ish% of it, if I'm going to be candid. I think without that, just don't bother, or don't think you could pull it off yourself, because we do live in an era of authenticity, and YouTube highlights that. But I do think, though, that like YouTube especially, or really just these social platforms where there's no barrier to entry, anybody could be a storyteller. You do need to have that ambition, drive, persistence, and resilience, for the simple reason that there are no overnight successes, right? Like even YouTube says it, if you follow their X Twitter account, they're like, your first video will not be good. And if you wait for perfection and you don't publish, you're not going to start engaging with the community. And realistically, the first time we did any video, it wasn't all roses and flowers and chocolates and whatnot. It was like, what the hell is this? Stay in your lane. And you have to be resilient. You have to really, really kind of, I always go block out your biggest fan, your mother, and your biggest critic, some loser that, has no skin in the game and is just probably jealous and envious. But, you will get a lot of feedback that is hurtful, especially when you're telling stories yourself and when you're being vulnerable and opening up. Like WatchMojo, we covered other things, but a lot of creators, they're opening up their hearts and their soul, and there's some, trauma and insecurity, and you kind of want compassion and empathy, and people are like, screw you, unsub, dislike, die. And you're like, oh my God, so you do have to stay persistent. You do have to have a lot of ambition and drive, because frankly, that's really what separates winners and losers, not loser in a bad way, but just those who don't win and get to the top, so to speak. So to me, that is probably in this racket of storytelling is probably like 35%, if I'm going to be honest. But I think ultimately where a lot of people stumble, and management is not like business school. I don't mean that. I mean just managing people, having basic business skills like understanding accounting. You see so many like gamers who are like, oh my God, I had to pay taxes, or or like not understanding what defamation is. It's like you don't have to be an expert to just understand baseline fundamentals of things. And I do think in a company like WatchMojo, what separates those who really emerge and have the best careers and the best runs are probably, ironically, the green one. Like those are the ones who do need to look at, like I always go, data is a tool. We don't care about the algorithm. It's more your gut, your instinct as a storyteller. But I do think that in an organization, it's actually maybe the green is the most important, but still on YouTube. Yeah, I mean, if you don't care about copyright, if you don't care about community guidelines, if you don't care about, whatever, you're not going to last. You're going to die. And particularly if you work in an organization, there's reporting, there's understanding, how finance and accounting and law works. So that one is maybe lesser if you're just like an independent creator. But I think if you're going to go work at a company, that one might be the one that explains why you succeed, like promotions and having, more pay, more responsibilities than the other two combined. But I will just say, notice how when I graph this, there's that little speck in the middle of the three spheres,
right?
Venn diagram. Most people are not in that center. Most people have one of those three. At best, they might have two. But if you're wondering, saying, can I make it? Or what does it take to really make it? Could you be in the middle? And if not, align yourselves with people who have complementary skills. That African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Right. I imagine like individual creators would want to try to shoot for a little bit more in that middle area. Whereas if you have an organization, you can hire people who are in different bubbles and then
like I've done pretty much every task at the company except one, video editing. Like it doesn't make sense. It's not my comparative advantage. Even one time in 2006, our head videographer had to leave. So he's like, just press record. That footage sucked. So technically I did record one thing one time. Even when I take pictures of my gals, they're like, man, you're really not good. And I'm like, I'm really not good at like photography, video. And I admit it. And it didn't make sense for me to try to learn that. It just made a lot more sense to hire. Although for an individual creator, yeah, sure, learn those skills. You're going to need them.
Makes sense. So WatchMojo, last week we talked about WatchMojo hitting 1 million subs. And after that point, there was a huge period of growth. So tell me about that. Did the growth come mostly in one wave, or how did that work?
Well, I would say, to be fair, if you ask the growth of our subscribers, yeah, I mean, that 2012 to 2016, 17 era was just incredible. We went from 10,000 subscribers to like 10 million subscribers in a few years, which drew competition and a lot of other headaches, which we've covered. Episodes 1 through 6, won't repeat them all. So that growth was really like this, as they call it, hockey stick growth curve, which was a phenomenal period, though to me was bittersweet because I had to manage now the second part of your question, which is the growth in people, products, and all that. So no, we actually had two or a few eras. The first one was really the international. Like the first one was just recognizing that YouTube is, 30% US, maybe 40, 50% if you include other English speaking languages. And it didn't make sense to me, especially somebody who was born in Iran, left at 4, lived a year in Spain. I used to speak Spanish very fluently. Now I could just order probably a margarita and some tacos, haha. But the point is, I did realize that, well, there's this huge international audience. And sure, maybe people grow up and learn English, but until they do, it would make sense for us to localize and adapt our programming from English to Spanish and many others. And yeah, WatchMojo Espanol was one of our first channels. And even though I understand Spanish, for me to figure out a system of how to localize was kind of like going to the drawing board and, meditating on a mountain and coming up with a system that would also maintain quality, but equally be able to scale, which wasn't obvious. And in fact, ironically, more power to the king of YouTube right now, Mr. Beast. The system that Mr. Beast kind of popularized and became known for his localization is actually something we pioneered. We started that, and eventually we hired a gentleman, and then it didn't really make sense for us long term, and he left. He was like a contract. It was like another company. Wasn't even like a contract worker. He left, and then he kind of brought that to Mr. Beast, and more power to him. But that was something that we started, and we had like 30 channels, like Espanol, Francais, Mandarin, Arabic, Hebrew, Indonesia. And people are like, why do you have a channel in Indonesia? I'm like, there's 300 million people in Indonesia. And again, I never really look at it for near-term financial. It just, to me, felt right to have all these channels. And today they account for half of our subscribers. So that was the first wave. And then, well, by the way, let me ask you this. When you first came across WatchMojo and you saw these international channels, and you worked at a company that also eventually launched some. Mm-hmm. So I would love just a little side note, like, sure. Were you like, this is smart, or were you like, this is batshit crazy? Why do we have all these channels?
No, I did think it was smart. It made sense. I did wonder if it was worth it in terms of like revenue, because certain countries have lower CPMs. They make less ad dollars than others. And so I wondered about that versus like the cost of translating the videos, because it did make sense in a business sense that the videos are done, so you would want to get as much mileage out of them as possible. So why not translate them to different languages if it doesn't cost that much? Throw them up. One video becomes 10, becomes 15, becomes 20. But yeah, in terms of like the return,
again, you're going there with revenue and all that. For me, it was really just my like statement of, life mission, like I'm just here to serve. I was like, hey, there's a little kid, there's a Manuel in Manila, there's a Hector in Mexico City, there's an Abdul in Morocco. And I wanted to give them the best top 10 lists on Batman and all that. And frankly, we do cover American culture. It's American pop culture largely, which is popular. And I just felt like, hey, there's a lot of kids who will actually learn English because they love Spider-Man. And if we could have these videos, it would help. So that was the first wave. And then I would say the second wave was probably brands or channels, right? Like, I mean, again, if you're like MTV, eventually you launch Nickelodeon, right? And if you're any other company, before long, you're like, well, how do we draft off the success that we have in one brand and basically maybe replicate the expertise we have in storytelling, casting, talent, procurement, whatever, to branch elsewhere? And for me, I always cared about like the community in terms of like a positive experience. Like people, when they used to watch our videos, they would be like, oh, your community, the comment section. Yeah, there's banter because you're ranking, but it's a pretty positive community. And I was like, yeah, so if we were doing top 10 Metallica songs on WatchMojo, if we wanted to do top 10 One Direction songs, not because they're talented, but not because I was this huge fan, but I was like, I want to serve this audience and give them what they want. I kind of understood that if you publish that right after top 10 Metallica, well, what's going to happen? The comment section is going to go sideways, and it becomes like a very abusive place. And I've always said it. If I run a restaurant, everybody's welcome. You could have a KKK member and a Black Panther member eating discreetly. I'm not here to judge if you're not wearing your hood, so to speak. But if you start fighting, I'll kick you both out. You know what I mean? So some of it, when we launched Miss Mojo in 2016, even though it was part of our business plan eventually to have it, in that era, and I'm not saying woke DI in any bad way, but just to explain that era, a lot of people criticize me. They're like, well, why are you gendering in this and that? I'm like, no. I'm like, media has always done this. Elle magazine, Vogue magazine, you kind of segment your audience. And what I liked was basically, let's say if, for example, we had, 60, 70% male on WatchMojo, 20% female, of which maybe 10% was LGBTQ. Miss Mojo, as I expected, turned out to be 60% female viewership, maybe 20% male. But then the LGBTQ component was much higher, 20-25%, just by nature of the, we could cover Glee, or again, I'm just using as example, we could cover shows and serve that fandom that I understood on WatchMojo would just not be well received. And even though and this is where I go, you have to believe in your instincts, your conviction. It's good to hear criticism, but people just complain sometimes. People get offended for everything. So Miss Mojo, I'm very happy we stuck to it. Today it has 5-6 million subscribers. And I would say After WatchMojo is one of the crown jewels. And I call it, if Time Magazine had people, or, this was our people, this was our Us Weekly, this was just like that companion brand that could stand on its own.
Right. And so this development of alternate brands, is this considered the second wave of growth for the company?
Yeah, I would say this was the second wave, because now you had to go hire different people. Even though technically a video editor could edit both videos, you needed people that watch Glee. You needed people that knew Disney inside out, but also this is where, as an entrepreneur, you have to be realistic. I knew that we took a lot of our celebrity oriented content and we put it on Miss Mojo. And I would say one of the reasons why WatchMojo also slowed down its growth, aside from the hack, aside from competition, was that, we took a chunk of topics and programming that we now shifted to Miss Mojo. And then I would say the third wave of growth, which was the most chaotic one, this is the one that led to the most headaches and heartbreaks and all that, really was when we kind of decided to push into new formats and new platforms. It was one thing to take our programming, adapt it for Snap or eventually TikTok. That's what I call iterative. But when we were hey, we're going to launch The Lineup, which today, by the way, The Lineup is a sports focused channel on YouTube, but the first lineup was a trivia show. That was us doing development and production in Hollywood lingo. So a little anecdote or more of a joke. So Chris Rock said of Pat Riley, the very successful NBA coach, who happened to be white, but you'll get why I mentioned that. Chris Rock, who's black, said, "No man has led more black young men to the promised land than Pat Riley, who was coach of the Lakers, Knicks, and Heat, really obviously helped a lot of young black athletes succeed." And so, not comparing myself to Pat Riley, nobody hired and gave more opportunities to young creatives who were relatively inexperienced out of Montreal, but just North America, because I was just very idealistic and naive. I was just hiring kids out of school because I was not really given opportunities. So I was obviously I would prefer experience, but I never discounted or, just disregarded kids, 21, 22, 24, 25 year olds. I myself at the time was probably 35. I just hired everybody and I just projected this assumption that everybody had those three bubbles. I was okay, this guy could work on Junior Mojo, which was our Nickelodeon, so to speak, or this gal could produce this lineup show, even if maybe they didn't have any experience. And sometimes it worked, but admittedly, most of the time it didn't, because there was just so much clutter. And whereas we basically went all in, total war on WatchMojo, where the whole company was in it, and this is The Lineup. Yeah, so it was a game show. So we kind of were partially in it. It was always an afterthought, and we were very skittish about, do we promote The Lineup, which clearly, good old Adrian there. So it was do we promote? That was in the show. I think that was an ad, but the show is more just a format where there's contestants and all that. When we put this on WatchMojo, yeah, the audience is what the hell is this? This is not what I signed up for. Unsub, this, go die. It was hard, but it was also me learning the hard way. You know, my critics always said, you wasted so much money. And I was like, well, we didn't really waste it. It was called an investment, but nonetheless, you know, we did invest in a lot of these shows, a lot of these formats. And, you know, we had some successes, right? In this total episode of expansion, Miss Mojo, Snap, and many others. But clearly, admittedly, none of them ever came close to WatchMojo. And it was humbling, but it was like, that's business, right? And, you know, I never criticized, and maybe I should have, but I never criticized the people. It was just that, you know, the amount of backing we put and commitment we put to WatchMojo, we didn't do on these other things because they were just a show. They were just this extra thing.
So Miss Mojo came the closest to like achieving WatchMojo status in terms of like viewership and presence. Are there any projects that you feel were kind of a missed opportunity that had the potential to be big, but maybe just didn't deliver?
So, I mean, there's like probably a very corporate diplomatic answer, which is not my style. That would be a waste of people's time. And if there's a young storyteller or entrepreneur, I'd rather give them value and real advice. So I realized that I was always I'm doing this podcast because we are trying to expand in podcasts, same themes, right? And here we have authority and we're like credible, right? But I'm always been very skittish actually about being in front of the camera. Like even in the company, I view myself more as a CEO, manager, leader, whatever, cheerleader than talent, even if I am a writer and researcher at heart. But I've always hesitated to kind of even as I talk about it now, I'm a bit like nervous, you know. I've always been very hesitant to get behind my own ideas. And I always, even if I start off saying, oh, let's say scripted, I have an idea, I try to be very collaborative. And sometimes I would just defer to others so that the team would get behind it. And it wasn't the optics of, oh, this is just Ash's pet project. That was a mistake, right? Like it's not anything about those people, but like if you're in Hollywood, you start off working at Sony or Disney and you do fetch coffee. You do go get your boss's dry cleaning. Forget the Harvey Weinstein treatment that we won't even get to, right? So that is the way Hollywood works. You really start and you expose, there's Harvey there, but you expose young talent to the way ideas are developed and talent is cast and concepts go from just an idea to reality. Idealistic mofo, just gave people money and said, go do this, right? Which was like batshit crazy. It was a monumental mistake. Like I signed a development deal with like Sonar Entertainment, which had like a lot of actual successful shows, but I never really got behind it, partly because Hollywood's a backwards place, but I was always skittish. Whereas sometimes I would get some random new guy and he or she would produce a show. And then if they left, where's the creative behind that show? Right. And they would also maybe not have some of the other bubbles, like maybe they didn't have any organizational skills to then look at the data to give recommendations to improve. Maybe they couldn't manage others. Sometimes there would be a lot of infighting and I would have these like two kids out of school who wouldn't get along. And I would just be like, what the fuck did I do? Like I could have just pursued my own ideas, you know? So my honest advice is as that Steve Jobs, like follow your own intuition, I'm not saying don't go to the extreme and just be like, I'm a star. Like that's bad. Like don't be at that end of the spectrum. But I was probably the one thing I regret is that which I kind of just passed the puck, didn't really give feedback because I didn't want to seem like I was micromanaging. And a lot of those ideas went nowhere. And it was a monumental, waste of money as per my critics. But to me, it was just investment. It was just research and development. If you don't do it, you know, you fail. And that's what separates real entrepreneurs from the wannabes. And in fact, I was thinking about this as I was thinking about the show. The toughest job in the world is motherhood. Like seriously, like motherhood is the most painful when you give birth. I think the only thing that rivals the pain of that I've read is being burnt alive, for context, let alone raising a kid. The second one is probably fatherhood, but we're not here to talk about that today. Entrepreneurship is the hardest one because you really have to not just see the vision, see the opportunity. You have to align a lot of people who have their own insecurities, their own goals. And you constantly have to balance like the greater good with individuals who kind of go in the same way. But so the difference I realize is between a founder entrepreneur and a CEO, if I could be candid, is like, I'm not a communist at all, but like, I believe in like people and like labor and ideas, which come from men and women, so to speak. Whereas I could have just taken the profits of the company and invested it in an index fund and called it a day and said, screw that. But so a CEO is usually playing with the company's money that they don't own. They are hired by the board. So it's very easy. More for you, a car for you. You win a car, you know.
Mhm.
Whereas as an entrepreneur, it's like you are long-term greedy at best. You constantly are foregoing, as a father would, as a provider would, like, oh, I'll eat the crust of the pizza. You have the pizza type of thing. And I realize that is like something that, like, if I had to give advice to younger entrepreneurs, is I go, don't be selfish, but be a bit more selfish. You know, it's good to be selfless. You have to be selfless. You have to be long-term greedy. You know, I mortgage my place. I don't have anything to prove to anybody else. But when I mention these things, it's not to bother new employees who don't care. It's just to kind of teach younger entrepreneurs that there's a trade-off, that according to you, your own sensitivities, you have to be not selfish, but still a little bit selfish, you know. And I'm not talking money. I'm really just talking about ideas, energy, and time. So yeah, there's like a period of 5 years where I really was very patient with a lot of people. And admittedly, if these folks who were fine individuals worked anywhere else, they probably would not have lasted more than a few months, because I would have been like, yeah, they're just not able to do those 3 bubbles. They're just not able to get the job done.
During this time of expansion, were there any ambitious projects that you had in mind that you didn't end up pulling the trigger on, but really, really wanted to?
Yeah, I would say, I actually, believe it or not, when I started WatchMojo, I was sitting on my couch in my condo, which I subsequently mortgaged to keep the company afloat. And my wife and I told her about some scripted projects I had. And I had probably, in another life parallel, I probably could have been very good at that. Comedies, dramas, action. Like, my imagination should be curtailed a bit. So I'm always thinking, and, you know, whatever. So it made no sense whatsoever in 2005 to do that. Like, think of it. You have $250,000. You put that in a movie, it'll most likely fail. Or even if it's creatively successful, commercially, most likely it'll fail. So I felt the risk return didn't make sense. And I thought building a media company like WatchMojo would allow me a better platform to eventually pursue those. But because of my personal disposition to not want to be too much like, I have an idea, let's do this, I never pursued those ideas, even though I had like development deals with Sonar. And during peak TV era, where like the Netflixes and the Disney Plus, and I'm not saying those guys would have come to me and said, Ash, you're this guy that does top 10 lists featuring clips from other IP. That is also an issue, that Hollywood, for all their creativity, it's a lot of narrow-minded people. It's not that they're bad people, but they're all very narrow. Like, you have one guy who's in charge of development of scripted, development of unscripted. There's a guy who's in charge of production. There's a guy who's in charge of compliance, clearances, right? So that was also part of it, that like when I would explore these ideas, I saw how close-minded Hollywood was. Their mind could not comprehend that a guy that started a media company with a background in business, who was doing these top 10 lists featuring, you know, movies and TV shows, could actually do this. Although when people looked at the ideas, whether it was the treatment, the log lines, the mini Bibles, the decks, whatever, they were like, this is pretty good. Oh yeah, and also I'd written books, and I ended up producing a documentary. So at 46, I probably would not have admitted this 2 years ago. I probably should have done those, but I've also learned that life is very long. Sure, tomorrow I could get hit by lightning and die, but I was like, yeah, you know what? Start to be a bit more selfish. And, you know, you could have your principles, but when you put your principles in practice, you learn that those are probably the projects that you should do. So instead of moping and complaining, which I'm not, again, I'm just sharing experiences, those are probably the things I'm going to lean in more. And you guys have seen this year, I've gotten more involved because we have so many talented people just working with you, working with the producers of the show. And I see how talented people are. But even I myself am open to feedback. Even I make mistakes. And I'm like, well, if you don't give people feedback and you're just like, good work, good work, good work, when they fuck up royally and you're like still diplomatic, you're like, hey guys, this was a bit of a monumental, colossal mind fuck. Then they're just shocked and traumatized. And then you're like, well, you do them a disservice by not telling them, right? So that's when you have to start to change, and it's never too late to change. The best moment to change was maybe yesterday. The second best time is today.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's for sure. The way that the platform has evolved now, has your approach to new projects or even the international side of things changed? Like, I know that YouTube has implemented new things like translations and captions into videos. Does that make international channels less valuable, or what's your take on that?
I mean, value is in the eyes of the beholder. Let's use Indonesia, which a lot of people are like, why do you have Indonesia? If Indonesia has 350 million people in 10 years, and we have, as an example, 10 million subscribers there, yeah, there's value there, even if we generate not enough for me to buy you this bottle of water, right? So value is relative first. So to any good entrepreneur, not to like losers who are just thinking of near term or just buried in a P&L. So I think there's Indonesia. So I think that I still am committed to international, but also one reason I brought on investors a few years ago was not necessarily that we needed the money, was because I needed a balance. I needed to be put in like a straitjacket, shackled a bit, because I was just saying yes to everything and just, investing quite a bit. So I think international has value, but if you manage it wearing my finance hat as a portfolio, you're like, I don't need it all to make money, but it shouldn't lose money where it then harms the company. So if the gains of Spanish, if there are gains, offset the losses of Indonesia as a whole, then there's merit to continue, but also if it makes sense, right? Like using, I mean, no disrespect here, but like, let's say our Arabic channel, well, yeah, like we may not run I always refer the top 10 lesbian scenes or whatever in movies. Like sensitivity, you're not going to do that there, or you're not going to do best bacon dishes. Like we're not stupid, right? I'll never forget that time when you guys showed the South Park episode with Mohammed, and I was like, thank you guys, thank you for showing this. And then anyway, it's fine. We removed it. But so there are sensitivities, there is finance, but you have to put that all together and make good decisions. So international to me still makes sense as a portfolio. But yeah, what I tell the team is authenticity. If somebody came to me and said we should launch a health channel, I'm like, who's the voice? Who's the editorial leader? I could fake it. Can't you tell? But you're not really going to stand out in a world with no barriers to entry, right? So I just tell and this is why it's not a coincidence. I know we've had many other podcasts. You've had tremendous success with your podcast on the UAP theme, which again, I still like to call UFOs because most normal people call it the UFOs.
Lots of people still do. Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy to me. I'm like, you, in a very affectionate way, I'm like, why didn't you just call it UFOs at first? But it's fine. Not a big deal. But I'm like, the reason why I was like, let's do this first was as like a showcase to be like, hey, if you could have the expertise on YouTube, this is a podcast on YouTube to me more than WatchMojo. Yes, we talk about WatchMojo, but I'm like, if anybody else wants to do a podcast, what's the authority? Who's the authority? Because otherwise everybody has a podcast. Everybody could do the video. So I am a lot more, maybe a bit more Hollywood studio to be like, first of all, you prove yourself, go do something small, show me that you could do it. And then I'll give you a bigger chance, even though my heart does not believe in that. My heart has always been just anybody can do anything, but that's a disservice. Telling anybody could be an entrepreneur is feeding a bunch of sheep to wolves, basically.
Yep. We're looking at the Unveiled channel now, which hosts some of the UAP podcasts, but they're also present on the core channel, which is where they've gotten a lot of their views from. So our WatchMojo audience loves aliens and UFOs. This I've learned.
Yeah. No, that they do.
We got poll results from the poll that I put up earlier. So once again, we asked, which of these skills do you think is the most important to succeed in media? And I think unsurprisingly, 62% said talent and creativity is number one, followed by ambition and persistence, 24%, and management and business skills, 13%, because you can always hire people to take care of that stuff.
No, I agree. I mean, I put 50 just to convey that that's the main one. 62 is fine. No surprises. Yeah, no, look, again, especially on YouTube, it would be higher. But the key is you do have to, yesterday, a gentleman in Montreal who's trying to get like the startup community to, pick up, he was like, why are Canadian startups so mid? Like, why is the scene so suck? And I told him, I said, Canada is not a risk-taking culture. And I said a lot of other things, ultimately to try to be constructive. But I did conclude it on that point. I said, ultimately, right now, there is so much venture capital out there that if 4 people, forget of the world who most are employees and followers, and you need those, right? I talk about eagles and turkeys. They're both important. A turkey can feed many people, but a turkey will never be an eagle, and an eagle is a predator. they play their part, right? I'm not saying one is better than the other.
Yeah.
Well, what I told them is I said, if you have 4 guys who go to, like, let's say a conference with ideas to start a business, and all 4 launch a startup just because there's cash available to them, they'll maybe all 4 fail. But if, let's say, 3 of them can have a meeting of the minds and say, we're going to combine forces because we have complementary skills, that's what I told them. I said, the odds of this one company being successful will probably be dramatically higher. So yeah, I think this supports the poll results as well.
Totally. So next week we will be talking about the infamous 2016 hack that WatchMojo fell victim to. Give us a little preview of that.
Do we have to? No, I mean, that's PTSD. I mean, this is therapy right now. That's actually a good example of me being very, like, laid back, not micromanaging, not being an anal asshole, and telling people to be more careful with security, like letting people use personal emails and, not being like, oh, you didn't put 2-step verification. If you don't do it by Friday, like, you're fired. Not that I would do it for that. And so a very dear team member, his account got compromised. And I never said anything to him. I've mentioned it a few times. It's just it's water under the bridge. But I remember, and this could have happened to anybody. And I thought actually it was probably one of my accounts initially. But yeah, it was basically, it wasn't, I don't know. I mean, it was probably malicious, but it wasn't fatal at least. It did hurt us. But again, this bottle is half full, right? So I go, some companies get hacked, like Sony, and careers are ended, and a lot of bad things happen. And in our case, it was a lesson. It did hurt us. But you know what? Again, some people lose their homes. Some people lose their lives, their loved ones. So it was another, I'm a resilient motherfucker. I don't give a fuck. Like, it sucked, but I was like, life goes on. But it allowed me to just tell the team, look, that's why I say do certain things. And I still stayed very demure, even though my daughters would laugh if they go, you demure. But I was like, but it was just a good example of being paranoid, being a bit more slow. Not, it's good to be quick and agile, but you never want to be in a rush or in haste, because then mistakes happen. But we'll talk about it more. I'm not on medication, but maybe I'll take some medication to talk about it. But, that's life.
That's it. Tune in next Thursday to hear about another traumatizing moment from Ash's career. Cool.
You guys are enjoying this more than I am.
This is great. I love these
I'm
stories.
the masochist. You guys are the sadists.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Cheers. Thank you.